The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 31. Grimace, Gold, Gird, Grift. Still November, 1996. That Saturday morning, Linda and Richard set out for Cornwall. Richard was acting a bit of a grouch. Well, really, a grimace, she thought, hiding her grin in her hand as she took in her husband in his royal purple jumper. It had been a Christmas present from the Cavendishes last year, and this was the first he was wearing it. "Are they expecting us for lunch?" he asked, adjusting the mirrors and checking his pocket atlas. The jumper was scratchy, and he was already considering ripping it off and dropping it in a skip or an Oxfam collection station. "I believe so. Mother said that Cook was making her famous meatloaf," Linda said with faint distaste, as Cook's famous meatloaf usually tasted as though it came from the nearly expired, freezer-burnt meat section of Sainsbury's. Cook had been Octavia's family cook when she'd grown up, and had to be approaching 100 years old by now. Well, with any luck, we'll hit a traffic jam on the M25 and we won't make it in time," Richard muttered to himself. "What did you say?" Linda asked, a bit waspishly. Richard spoke a bit louder. "I said, with any luck, we won't run into a traffic jam on the M25. Linda grinned. "That's what I thought you said. Well, if we do, we can always stop for lunch on the way. I've been craving a quarter-pounder with cheese lately for some reason." I've had enough Mackies lately. How do you feel about a Whopper, my burger queen?" Linda smiled. "Well, I do have a couple of very nice crowns, you know." "Do you, Lady Linda?" Richard asked in mock surprise. "You know I do, Richard. You did the dental work yourself." They laughed and settled in for the long drive ahead. In the end, the M25 didn't let Richard down. He was so glad for the momentary reprieve from his in-laws that he even agreed to eat lunch at McDonald's. Besides, the McRib was back. On Tuesday, Linda was surprised and pleased when Dora Tonks called her, asking if she would like to go out with her for a bite to eat. "That sounds lovely," she said. "I'll just let Richard know I'm having dinner with a friend." Strangely enough, he didn't ask who she was meeting for dinner. "Have a good time, Lindy Hop." "Are you sure you don't mind? I'm happy to make you something before I go. Or, perhaps I should just skip it. I know we didn't have plans, but I was looking forward to a nice night together, just the two of us. I know this past weekend is rough for you. Mum really was bang out of order, asking when you plan to start dyeing your hair." Richard smiled, touching his temples, which did indeed have a few silver strands starting to show. "I'm not sure what she was thinking. Doesn't she know heroes never die?" "Just don't colour it, all right? I'm looking forward to your silver fox years," Linda chuckled. "You're sure you don't mind me going out for a bite?" "Not at all. Have a great time, love." As soon as Richard heard the station wagon backing out of the drive, he allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. He had been fretting over how he could explain his sudden departure to Linda this evening. They had returned from Cornwall very late on Sunday, and after a grueling Monday at work, had fallen into bed at barely 7:30. This was their first night alone together in several days, and he had worried that she would be miffed if he left suddenly. He withdrew his mobile from his pocket and thumbed through his contacts down to Lobo. "Ready," said his text message. Merely seconds after hitting send, there was a cracking noise in the entryway. Lobo came round the corner into the living room, looking rather haggard and drawn, but bright-eyed. "Did Linda go out, then?" "Yes, a friend of hers called her up for dinner tonight. Lucky it happened," Richard said, gathering the large bag of medical supplies he had collected, ready for tonight. Yes, very lucky, Lobo agreed. From his pocket, he produced a green drawstring pouch. He used his wand to light a fire in the fireplace. Within seconds, it was crackling merrily. Right then, let's go. Richard came to stand by him, and the man tossed a pinch of green powder from the drawstring pouch into the fire. Hogwarts headmaster's office. To Richard Granger's delight and amazement, the debridement went exactly as hoped. He had sanitized and prepared the room, which was a private space, off of the school infirmary. Professor Snape was able to enchant the darkness in Dumbledore's body down to one index finger whilst they watched. As soon as the black skin reached the topmost knuckle, Lobo swooped in to perform a stasis charm. The infirmary matron Madame Pomfrey assisted with the severing charm, and with adept agility, Richard performed the debridement procedure quickly. Lobo maintained the stasis charm whilst Snape siphoned off the blood with his wand, and chanted healing charms. They waited a few minutes before Lobo removed his stasis charm. Miraculously, almost inexplicably, it had worked. There was no new growth of blackness, and Madame Pomfrey's diagnostic charm revealed no dark magic within the old wizard. I should like Madame Pomfrey to keep you here for observation tonight, just to be sure. But I believe it is done, Snape said, unable to keep the awe out of his voice. Professor Dumbledore's eyes were misty as he took in the three before him. I cannot tell you enough how much I appreciate everything you've done here tonight. Thank you, each and every one of you, for working together to save my life. He smiled, raising an eyebrow over his half-moon spectacles at Richard. I suppose I shall have to die another day. Lobo cleared his throat nervously, fighting away his own tears as he beamed at his friend. Will you use a false finger, Professor Dumbledore? He asked. Mouse says that Peter Pettigrew has a silver hand that he uses now for some reason. Yes, but I think I should like it to be gold. Gold is much less susceptible to corrosion and is more compatible with our bodies. He turned to Richard. What do you think, Mr. Granger? Shall I have a gold finger? Richard laughed a bit giddily, as much in relief that everything had gone well, as in amusement at Dumbledore's turns of phrase.
New Year's Eve, 1996. It was early in the afternoon when Bellatrix began getting ready for the evening's festivities. She took her time, and a lot of special care to make herself even more beautiful than usual tonight. She'd used an ungodly amount of Sleek Easy on her hair, and had chosen foundational undergarments that pushed her chest up to the point of near impossibility, and had chosen a deep green gown that showed off a fair bit of leg.
She wanted everything to be perfect. She was determined that the Dark Lord would see her looking gorgeous tonight, and with any luck put a spawn in her as well. Unfortunately, she was having a hard time marshalling her thoughts away from the interloper. It had been a curious few months, having him around. According to the Dark Lord, he had been raised as a Muggle. It was possible that any magic he'd possessed had been snuffed out by his upbringing. That day at the Ministry, he hadn't used a traditional wand, and since that day, as far as Bellatrix was aware, the interloper had not been sent out on any missions. Instead, he seemed to come to meetings simply to offer strange, but oddly often helpful advice to the Dark Lord. For example, when Voldemort appeared to be experiencing pain in his torso one day, the man had produced from his Muggle jacket an unusually shaped bottle filled with colourful discs that looked like sweets. Writing on the bottle said Rinny in large letters. He had offered the Dark Lord some, explaining that they might help him feel better. Voldemort made Wormtail eat some first. When the man didn't die after a few minutes, and his diagnostic spell seemed healthy, Voldemort took some as well, and felt better within moments. "May I have these?" the Dark Lord had asked, tilting the bottle gently to and fro in fascination, watching as the little discs clattered in the plastic bottle. "Of course. I can get more. Indigestion is the worst," the interloper told him. Bellatrix had stewed in the corner of the room. And then there was this whole Muggle sales business. What the fuck was that even about? Bellatrix was still confused. Richard and Linda flew into Malfoy Manor, dressed in their finest black tie formal wear. It was one of their first nights out in quite some time. Work had been rather busy, and their own individual activities had taken up more than a few evenings each week. However, the night of the Malfoy New Year's Eve Gala put all of their separate adventures out of mind of Richard and Linda. It had been several long weeks since the two of them had gone out together in the evening, and months since they had dressed up and gone somewhere nice. Both of them were determined to have a good time, in spite of the dangers that each of them knew lurked in Malfoy Manor. Lord Voldemort stepped forward almost immediately after they emerged from the fireplace. He nodded first to Richard, then bowed toward Linda.
"Hello, Richard. Mrs. Granger, I do not believe I had the pleasure of talking with you the last time we were all together,"
the Dark Lord said smoothly as he greeted Linda in the Malfoy drawing-room. So far this evening, Bellatrix's efforts to beautify herself had had little effect on Voldemort, who had barely spared her a glance as she entered the drawing-room. He only had eyes for his disgusting child's disgusting Muggle mother. Bellatrix tossed back her spiced rum and glared at the Muggle woman, who had the audacity to arrive in a midnight blue dress that barely skimmed her shape. "Hiya, Bellatrix!" She spun around. "Oh, it's you!" she sneered. The interloper had somehow crept up on her when she'd been distracted by his Muggle wife. "What do you want?" "Ah, geez, just saying howdy to you. Offering my best for the new year." Howdy? Was that some kind of spell she was unfamiliar with? She was still entirely unsure if this man could perform magic. It was true, he seemed to be able to captivate Lord Voldemort with his increasingly outlandish and off-the-wall ideas. Was that his magic? Now the interloper stood across from her, staring intently at her. "Bellatrix, are you all right?" Bellatrix's eyes refocused, and she realized that she had been lost in thought, and had not paid attention as the interloper had spoken to her. "What did you say?" she snapped. "I was just saying how lovely you look tonight. Green is such a striking colour on you." She was momentarily at a loss for how to respond. It had been so long since someone had given her a compliment. Thank you." The words felt strange coming out of her mouth. There was a lull in their conversation, and nearby both of them overheard Lucius speaking loudly to McNair over the orchestral music. "Ah, yes, I agree, this music is quite nice. It's far better than what we have been listening to around here. All hours of the day and night, just an absolute cacophony of noise. I never thought that a harp being played could sound so much like a herd of cats dying. And please, don't get me started on the cymbals." The interloper turned back to Bellatrix. "Ah, so it sounds like they're banding together. I trust he was able to get the instruments to them, then. A regular they might be giants in the making, yes?" "They are giants," Bellatrix said snidely. Then her eyes widened in surprise. "Was that you? Did you give Lucius those instruments to leave for the giants?" "Ah, geez, I did. Is that all right? I thought it might give them something to do besides pull up trees and throw rocks at each other." Bellatrix grinned wickedly.
It has been driving my brother-in-law mad for weeks. He says that he barely sleeps, even with a silencing charm in his suite. Every time I come to visit, it sounds as though they are torturing each other slowly with noise. He's talked of packing them up and apparating them far away just to be rid of them, perhaps to some remote forest in Istanbul.
Not Constantinople? The interloper frowned.
It's now called Istanbul, she said.
Not Constantinople?
Bellatrix gritted her teeth.
No.
Ah, geez. Well, I didn't mean to make poor Lucius suffer that way.
Then he looked down at Bellatrix, matching her wicked grin.
But I suppose it's a necessary evil. They're no good to us if they kill each other first. Better if they are all on the same sheet of music.
Bellatrix's grin grew wider.
Perhaps this Richard fellow wasn't so bad.
What an interesting night, Linda said, as they stepped back into their own living room. She kicked off the silver pumps that had been killing her feet for several hours, glad to be home.
Yes, very interesting. I'm glad to be out of there, though. Some of those people are rather insufferable.
Richard loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top button of his tuxedo.
It looked as though Bellatrix was being polite this time, at least to you. This summer I put my foot in my mouth and made a rather rude comment to her. I think she has hated me ever since, Linda said, walking into the kitchen for a glass of water before bed. Yes, she is an odd one. I don't think she makes friends very easily. She seems a bit mentally unstable.
Richard followed her into the kitchen, leaning against the counter.
So, what did you and Voldemort talk about?
Not much, Linda said lightly. Narcissa warned me that I shouldn't share information with him, considering who he is. The topic of Voldemort had come up between them exactly one time since the reception at Malfoy Manor back in the summer. It happened a couple of days after Linda had learned from Narcissa exactly who the man was who'd been talking to Draco and Hermione at the party. Linda had asked Richard if he had known who he was, and he told her that he had been introduced to him, conveniently leaving out the fact that the introduction had been made several months before. They had agreed that the Dark Lord being back was bad news, but that this should be treated as a case of keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. Better to maintain a semblance of friendship with the Malfoys for protection, not only for themselves, but for Hermione. In truth, neither of them wanted the other to know their part in any of it, and so neither of them was eager to discuss it with the other. Still, Linda found it hard to let it go tonight.
Does Lucius ever talk about him? Not really, hedged Richard. The man asked about Hermione, you know. He seemed surprised that I knew she wasn't my biological daughter for some strange reason. But I didn't want to discuss the fact that she was adopted. That wizard gives me the creeps. You're not the only one, agreed Richard.
And what was all that business about his company? I felt like I was at a sales pitch for Oriflame. Is he really starting a company? It sounded almost like a pyramid scheme.
No idea, Richard said nonchalantly.
In truth, Richard had a very good idea, because it had been his idea in the first place. Flashback. October 1996. When Richard had first suggested the idea of a pyramid scheme to Voldemort back in October, it was on a bit of a lark. He'd had a patient that day who was involved in Amway, and was trying to pressure his staff into buying in and joining his downline. Richard had grown up in an Avon household, with a mother who was often stressed about meeting her sales goals, so he knew the struggle that the patient was facing, but the man that day had seemed unwilling to take no for an answer, and Richard had had to be quite firm with him.
The Order had been trying to come up with ways to sidetrack Voldemort, to pull his attention away from his far more sinister plan of killing Muggles and Muggle-borns and taking over the world, beginning with Britain. They felt that if Richard could present another task for the Dark Lord to focus on, it might divide his strength. So when the idea of a pyramid scheme occurred to him, it seemed the perfect distraction. It had all occurred one night a few months before, a dreary October evening. The Death Eaters were sitting round a large, seldom-used dining room in Malfoy Manor that the Dark Lord had taken over as his own. Everyone was listening intently to Voldemort as he discussed the ways that he planned to take over the Muggle world once he had achieved domination over the Wizarding one.
"We must kill all those who rise up against us. We seek power over the oppressors. We must do all we can to crush the Muggle systems of government, education, and free enterprise."
Richard took a deep, calming breath, and unclenched his teeth.
"Well, if you're planning to achieve world domination, I think relying on the strengths of the Wizarding world is the best way to do it."
There was silence in the room, as everyone waited to see if Richard would be punished for interrupting. Finally, Voldemort simply said,
"Explain what you mean, cousin."
"Well, Muggles are known for believing in, let's say, alternative therapies, the mystical, nonconformist remedies, snake oils and the like."
Nagini raised her head hopefully.
"Yes,"
Voldemort sneered from his seat at the head of the table.
"Quite idiotic, the lot of them."
Richard nodded sagely.
"Quite. So, the best way to get them on your side is to get them to feel as though they could access the benefits of wizardry and witchcraft without actually providing them with real witchery. Create a product that bills itself as a magical cure-all for everything that ails them, and they will flock to you. You won't have to hunt them. They will even pay you for it."
"And how do I go about doing this?"
"Well, first things first, you've got to incorporate, form a private limited company, and register it with Revenues and Customs. You'll have to choose a catchy name, something that conveys ability and strength, something that the Muggles will trust."
Voldemort looked thoughtful.
"I have heard an excellent Scottish name that I believe I may adopt as my own. We shall call it MacDonald's."
Unfortunately, I believe that name is already taken," Richard said gently.
"But I should like to use it as my own."
"Yes, the difficulty is there are some within the Muggle population who may already be familiar with the name from something different. I believe it will be too difficult to use the name McDonald's for your company. However, for your own private use, I think it is perfection."
Voldemort gave a disgruntled nod, as though mollified.
"Very well. Does anyone have a suggestion?"
There was silence in the room. Luckily, Richard Granger's brain was made for coming up with things to fill such silence.
Well, I did have the idea of the Fixer Elixir. It's catchy, gets right to the point of what you're trying to sell. It would be fairly easy to create a jingle and branding for the merchandise side of the house. And as for the product itself, it's simple sugar and caffeine placebo. It'll give the user the temporary endorphin fix they're looking for."
Voldemort nodded, as though he understood everything Richard had just said. Across the room, Bellatrix rolled her eyes so hard that Richard was a bit surprised they didn't fall out. Voldemort frowned.
"But when the product is used and does not work properly long term, they will no longer buy it.
Nope. That's when we really go for it. That's the time to upsell them to the new and improved magical fixer elixir. Tell them it has more nutrients for detoxifying and healing.
Voldemort nodded slowly. Yes. Yes. And the second elixir can be a poison. We can eradicate millions of Muggles quite easily.
Richard's stomach twisted into a knot. Well, you have to walk a fine line with that.
What do you mean?
I only mean, if you eliminate all the Muggles, for one, you have no more profit. And then you have to consider that without Muggles, you have no one to act as your servants. Who's going to prepare food, work in factories, repair things? Elves can only do so much. You have to keep some of the Muggles around, you know.
Voldemort seemed to consider this. Perhaps you are right. Well, then, once we have sold the elixir, what then?
Well, you see, that's the beauty of it. The product isn't really the elixir. It's the follow-on customers. The way it works is you start with a couple of salespeople, and they sell to their friends, but they also get their friends to sell to their friends, and then those people sell to their friends, and so on and so forth, until you have only a handful of people at the top, and many salespeople at the bottom. The people who come into the business later end up paying more because they are paying all the people in front of them.
Bellatrix's agitation was clear from across the room. Apparently she could hold her tongue no longer.
My lord!
Yes, Bellatrix?
This sounds foolish. Allow me to go out into the Muggle world. I can kill 30 or 40 of them a day, easily.
But this elixir, I think it could reach many more. We only need to gain their trust, and then we introduce the poison. It could be thousands at once, Voldemort said excitedly.
And that was how Richard Granger came to be in charge of the product known as the Fixer Elixir. His idea for the plan had been simple. He would come to Voldemort for opinions on everything: logo, product design, taste and smell. He felt certain that the research development chaps at MI6 would enjoy taking on the challenge. He would invent lengthy lists of fictional customers and exhaustive fake market research. He would create a fake bookkeeping spreadsheet and fake brochures, falsified bank statements. Voldemort would believe they were reaching thousands, when in fact they were doing nothing of the sort. What he did not count on was Quentin Jugson, a Death Eater who had apparently been waiting for just such a moment to display his uncanny marketing prowess. My lord, if I may assist Lord Granger in this endeavour—
You may, Jugson.
Richard Granger took one look at the eager face of Jugson, who looked as though all his dreams had come true at once. Oh, this wasn't good. Jeez, he said, a bit miserably.
Chapter 32. Cavities and Cabinets. Mid-November 1996. To his utmost disbelief, Richard soon found himself in brainstorming sessions with the eager Quentin Jugson. In the middle of November, not long after Richard had performed surgery on Dumbledore's index finger, he was cloistered in a small parlour in Malfoy Manor, seated with the indefatigable young wizard. The man produced splashy storyboards of television adverts, mock-ups of magazine spreads, even plans for sponsorships, with Saracens, a women's rugby premiership club. Richard stared at all of it, mouth agape.
Sorry to interrupt, Jugson, but, where did you learn to do all of this? When and where did you learn about adverts and sponsorships?" Jugson reddened in bashfulness. "May I speak honestly, sir?" "Of course." "I was a half-blood Slytherin, and I got caught up in the excitement surrounding the Dark Lord with several others in my year. I was 13 when I first heard the stories about him, and they were the stuff of legend. I finished at Hogwarts and took the Dark Mark in late September of 1981. The Dark Lord disappeared a month later. Never met him in person, and I had not performed any missions for him, so I was acquitted with only probation." Richard nodded, encouraging Jugson to continue. "After the first Wizarding War was over, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. My grandfather was Muggle-born, and he suggested his alma mater, a Muggle university. I chose advertising on a whim, and found that I really enjoyed it." "So, let me understand this. You're a half-blood, with a Muggle-born grandfather. You attended a Muggle university, and yet, somehow, you still became a Death Eater?" Richard knew his face was a mask of incredulity, but he did not know how else to approach this. "You have to understand, being a half-blood in Slytherin made me a target, even amongst those in my house. I felt as though I had to prove that I belonged, and the things we were being told were very whitewashed, if you will. Yes, he espoused pure-blood rhetoric, but he also presented the idea of a utopian synergy between the magical and mundane worlds. To an outsider looking in, it didn't seem so bad. I only realized what it truly was once it was too late. All of my friends had already joined, and they intimated that I would be hunted down if I didn't as well." Jugson dropped his head in his hands and rubbed at his sandy blonde hair in despair. "Why did you tell me all of this?" Richard asked in confusion. I don't know. I suppose it was the fact that you were raised as a Muggle, that you have experience in the Muggle world. Sometimes, listening to you speak, it's easy to forget that you are the Dark Lord's cousin." Jugson looked up fearfully. "I suppose you plan to kill me now?" Richard sighed deeply. "Now is no time to die, Jugson. I cannot fault you for a decision you made as a teenager." At Jugson's look of relief, Richard pressed him. "But I do need for you to tell me this. If you had to do it over again, if you could go back and tell that 13-year-old boy what you know now, would you make the same decision and join the Death Eaters?" Salazar, no. Jugson looked skyward, an anguished expression on his face. "Merlin, why am I telling you all this? I'm just digging my own grave, aren't I?" "Not with me. You can trust me," Richard said. "I won't say a word about any of this to the Dark Lord." Jugson looked as though he could not believe his luck. "You really won't?" "No. You and I are not so different, Jugson." Jugson gave him an appraising look. "Do you really plan to create a pyramid scheme to entrap Muggles?" Richard sighed heavily. The younger man had just poured out a heartfelt confession to him. Richard wasn't about to show his entire hand to the man. He seemed trustworthy, but Richard did not know him that well yet. Still, this small confession did not seem so bad, in light of what Jugson had told him. "Not really. I just thought it might be funny. My cousin seems the type to fixate on, let us say, unusual things. I don't particularly relish the idea of killing a bunch of people, and this seemed like a good distraction." Jugson nodded in comprehension, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I quite agree. But will you do me this favour? I know you suggested Fixer Elixir as a bit of a lock, but it really could be something. Would you help me make a real go of the Fixer Elixir?" Richard closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "All right. But no pyramid scheme, all right? Just a straight, legitimate business." Jugson stuck out a hand to shake. And that was how Richard Granger became the reluctant chief executive officer of Fixer Elixir Limited, one of the first energy drinks in the English market. Early December 1996. The Fixer Elixir, however, wasn't Voldemort's only focus that late autumn. Early in December he told the group at large his plans for Hogwarts, and Albus Dumbledore. There were several surprised looks that passed among the group, when the Dark Lord announced that Richard's and Lucius's children had been assigned the task of killing the headmaster. Bellatrix was nearly apoplectic with rage at being left out of this decision. "My lord! Do you really believe that these two children are capable of carrying out this plan?" Lucius looked thunderous. "How dare you question my son's resolve?" "He was part of the group that came to the Department of Mysteries just summer last," Bellatrix yelled hotly. "As an infiltrator, an interloper in Potter's little group," Lucius hissed. "Draco and Miss Granger have been working tirelessly to gain Potter's trust, and that of Albus Dumbledore's, and now the spoils of their labour have nearly come to fruition, and you dare doubt them?"
"Enough!"
Voldemort shouted. Bellatrix and Lucius cowed automatically at the sound.
"I have complete confidence in both young Malfoy and in Miss Granger. Their parentage, if nothing else, indicates that they come from loyal and capable stock."
Bellatrix, if possible, looked even angrier, but shut her mouth. "My lord, I pledge to you that Draco will remain steadfast in his loyalties." Lucius bowed to the Dark Lord.
Voldemort nodded and turned to Richard. "And what say you, Richard? Do you feel that your daughter can do what is asked of her?"
"I have supreme confidence in my daughter, that she will do the right thing," Richard affirmed. "Well, I suppose we shall see, then," Bellatrix said nastily. "And I, for one, intend to see it happen." Early January 1997. Dumbledore's office was filled with a low hubbub of discussion. Professors Dumbledore, Snape, and McGonagall were seated with Lupin, Tonks, and Sirius Black. Richard, Draco, and Hermione rounded out the group. Richard cleared his throat. "A new wrinkle has developed that we weren't counting on. Voldemort told the group at large that the children have been assigned the task. Bellatrix and a few others plan to come to the school to see it happen, to bear witness to it. I'll make every effort to join their team." "They plan to break into the school?" Tonks asked with wide eyes. "That would be difficult," Sirius said. "I can tell you. If I had not been able to transform into a dog, it would have been impossible to get into Hogwarts a few years back." "Precisely. Likely they expect myself and Draco to grant them passage," Snape intoned. "But it's common knowledge that security has been stepped up at the school," Tonks said. "We've got Aurors doing round-the-clock patrols, inside and outside of the school, as well as in the village of Hogsmeade. They won't be able to just knock on the gates and walk in without a fight." "That is why we're going to use an old black family heirloom to get them inside," Dumbledore said, eyes twinkling. Draco, Sirius, and Tonks all looked at him, startled. Draco, perhaps you remember your old Quidditch teammate, Grant Montague?" "Right," Draco nodded. "He got himself in some kind of trouble last year, and disappeared for a while. Didn't he somehow manage to apparate and splinch himself in a toilet?" "Correct," said Dumbledore.
"We're going to have them splinch themselves in a toilet?"
Hermione asked, alarmed.
"No," Dumbledore smiled. "Grant Montague, you see, was trapped inside of a vanishing cabinet. That vanishing cabinet is still here on the grounds of Hogwarts, the one that he was trapped in. However, it has a twin. There is another one located in a shop in Nocturne Alley. It once belonged to Phineas Nigellus Black, a former headmaster at Hogwarts."
Dumbledore pointed a bit behind him at a painting of a disgruntled man who looked vaguely like Sirius.
"I don't appreciate you nicking my valuable possessions for your harebrained schemes, Dumbledore,"
the painting's occupant groused.
"You'll shut your knob, gobbler, if you know what's good for you,"
Sirius growled. He was rather familiar with this particularly rude ancestor, as the man's other painting still graced the walls at Black House.
"Padfoot,"
admonished Lupin, resting a hand on his friend's knee.
"You don't know the lengths that this man goes to annoy me, on nights that you spend at Tonks's place."
Dumbledore quelled Sirius's annoyance with a kindly look, then filled in the group on the passage that could be created using the vanishing cabinets.
"There's only one major difficulty. The cabinet we have in our possession is broken, owing to being dropped by Peeves the poltergeist some years ago. That's the reason that Montague wasn't able to simply exit the cabinet after he was forced inside."
"Can you fix it?"
Richard asked.
"It's a very complex process, a highly sensitive bit of magic," Professor McGonagall offered. "It's possible, but it won't be easy. And it's for that reason that we feel that Mr. Malfoy and Miss Granger should take on this assignment themselves."
"Sorry, what?" Draco asked.
Lupin was nodding thoughtfully.
"Yes, a very good idea, Minerva."
Draco looked more worried. "Why do you think it's a good idea that we perform this repair? You're talking about creating a passageway for people to come through. What if we get it wrong and someone dies?"
Dumbledore leaned forward in his seat and folded his fingers in front of him. The flickering candlelight glinted off of his gold finger.
"I have the utmost confidence in you, Mr. Malfoy. You will need to tell Voldemort through your fathers about the cabinet. Your father knows the Montagues, and likely knew the details of his ordeal. And as a member of the Board of Governors, he was aware of when the artifact was broken. It will seem suspicious if the cabinet is suddenly fixed perfectly and ready to be used. If you explain that you are repairing the cabinet in secret, Lucius will be more assured of your loyalty to this task."
"But, can't we just tell him I'm repairing it and then someone more capable actually does it when the time is right?"
Draco asked worriedly. Dumbledore fixed him with a hardened stare. "It is my belief that the truth is generally preferable to lies."
Draco's eyes flew wide.
"We're literally lying to them, but pretending to kill you."
Dumbledore smiled.
"And the best of us sometimes eat our words. Nevertheless, it shall make an interesting and enlightening NAWT-level project for yourself and Miss Granger. The two of you are amongst the brightest of the year. I am certain that you will do well. But to make sure that your work is on the right track, you shall check in with your heads of house on occasion, and let them know your progress."
Sirius Black spoke up.
"When do you foresee this happening, Professor Dumbledore? When are we putting this plan into motion?"
"I imagine it will take some time for Mr. Malfoy and Miss Granger to work out repairing the vanishing cabinet."
Severus may need a little bit of time to brew the proper potions, and Harry and I have a few things that need to be discussed before I go into hiding. Not to mention, a headmaster dying is likely to disrupt our students' education greatly. Better that it happens near the end of term, I think. March 1997. Remarkably, Richard's plan to distract the Dark Lord with a business venture seemed to be working. Jugson proved to be quite good at marketing, and the Fixer Elixir hit shop shelves with a bang. Sales soared, and Richard was beginning to regret his spur-of-the-moment idea. The MI6 R&D team did not disappoint. The concoction they made was tasty. The vaguely fruity, sugary drink appealed to nearly every taste bud, and Jugson's eye-catching and engaging adverts ensured that the drink had an exciting launch. By March, it was flying off the shelves, and Jugson was delirious with glee that his advertising campaign was going so well. Richard could not say the same, as he had to provide Voldemort with weekly updates on their progress. He found himself becoming a reluctant expert in things like market share, working capital, and quarterly earnings futures. As a dentist, it had never been his intention to develop a sugary drink. He was now having to ask his patients if they had recently taken up the habit of drinking Fixer Elixir, based upon their new cavities and developing gingivitis. During every meeting, Richard at least took modest pleasure in noting Bellatrix's anger at the whole situation. She telegraphed her thoughts clearly to anyone who looked at her. Richard could tell that she saw this as yet another stupid straw, at which the Dark Lord was grasping. Discussing his predicament he found himself in with Lobo, Sirius, and Tonks one evening over beers at Grimmauld Place, Richard shook his head ruefully. "I suppose it's my own fault. I suggested the sodding drink. How was I to know that this dumb idea was going to result in me being the one to successfully shill sugary syrup to the masses?" Lobo chuckled lightly. "Well, at least the money you are generating is going to a good cause. McGonagall and Dumbledore have set up an excellent Muggle-born integration program at the school. Current and future Muggle-borns will find it far easier to commingle with Wizarding Society from here on out. Just let that be your quantum of solace." The burst of laughter from the four of them was at direct odds with the dreary surroundings of the Black House. "That was a good one, Lobo," Richard said. April 1997. Draco and Hermione found themselves in front of the Vanishing Cabinet, in the Room of Requirement for what felt like the 100th time since January. It had been an exhausting process. In addition to needing to repair the physical cabinet, they also needed to correct the broken magic within the cabinet. It had proven quite difficult, requiring knowledge of several obscure ancient runes, as well as an extensive understanding of charms. It truly would have been an excellent NEWT-level project, they both thought, if the circumstances had been less dire. The two of them had taken it upon themselves to contact Mr. Borgin, at Borgin & Burke, the shop in Knockturn Alley where the twin of the Vanishing Cabinet was located. Draco emphasized that Borgin should not sell the other Vanishing Cabinet, and should be available for testing when the time came. Hermione gave him a coin like the one she had created for Dumbledore's army, so that they could communicate with the man when the time was right. Draco kept his father updated on the Vanishing Cabinet as well, and Lucius, in turn, told Voldemort and the other Death Eaters. It was decided that, when the time came, Lucius would not go to Hogwarts with the invasion party, owing to the fact that he was on the Board of Governors and could not be seen appearing to conspire in the death of Albus Dumbledore. Hermione and Draco were both anxious for the time to come, and dreading when it would. Despite their best efforts, the cabinet was proving difficult to repair. Every test so far had yielded either no results or the very worst of results. Time seemed to work differently inside the cabinet, This was in line with what Grant Montague had reported. His ramblings had gotten better over the months, but he was still afflicted with night terrors, and had not been able to resume his studies at Hogwarts. Still, Draco remembered visiting the wizard in the infirmary before he was sent to St. Mungo's for long-term care. Montague had talked about how time seemed to stretch, to loop back, to twist and turn in on itself like a ball of string, impossibly snarled. The first few tests, nothing happened. Once they started to try various charms, things began to happen, but they weren't always good things. They tried sending through a glass of milk. It came back solid, yellowed and cracking. They tried sending an apple. The mushy brown ooze that returned smelled like the inside of a skip. Hermione dreaded the moment that they would need to send a living test subject through it. Draco vaguely wondered if they could capture Mrs. Norris.
"Draco, that's awful,"
Hermione admonished.
"Would you rather send through your ferret?"
Draco asked.
"Leave Houdini out of this."
But improving in their venture they were, and whether they liked it or not, the time was drawing nigh. Chapter 33. Presentations and Preparations. May 1997. Harry seemed more and more agitated as the months passed. Early in the school year, he had confided in Hermione and Ron that he and Dumbledore were meeting periodically to discuss the Dark Lord, the prophecy, and things that might come to pass, as well as information that could be helpful in defeating Voldemort. She could tell that all of this was weighing heavily on him, and whilst she felt guilty knowing about the plot afoot to stage Dumbledore's murder, she had agreed not to tell him. He would find out after everything was done, she knew, but in order to sell the believability of the murder, everyone had agreed to keep the information within the 9 of them, for a while at least. It was a tenuous but well-connected network. Draco and Hermione liaised with Snape and McGonagall. In turn, the two of them discussed things with Dumbledore. Dumbledore met regularly with Richard, Lupin, Sirius, and Tonks. Tonks was often on patrol in the school and its grounds as part of her oral protection, and was able to speak to everyone. Late May 1997. When the Lucius mobile phone buzzed in his pocket, Richard sighed deeply. It had been a long day. Jugson had stopped by the dental practice during Richard's lunch hour, and had monopolized his time by recapping in great detail the investor meeting that the wizard had just come from. Richard only wished to eat his sausage sandwich and chips in peace, but was forced to endure discussions of margins, just-in-time delivery, and the need for a website. Hardly a day went by that Richard did not regret coming up with the Fixer Elixir, but some days, like today, as the grease cooled and congealed beneath his sausage sandwich, he wished he could go back in time and suggest that perhaps Voldemort should sponsor a celebrity golf tournament, or something else entirely. He stood and made his way to the basement to retrieve the beat-up tennis rackets that he pretended to use to play doubles with his old friend Robert. He tapped out a quick response to Lucius that they could meet on the curb since Linda was home.
"Linda, Robert wants to meet for doubles,"
he called as he came back up the stairs. She met him in the hall with a small gift bag.
"That's perfect. I saw this funny shirt passing my shop yesterday, and I couldn't resist. With all of this tennis you've been playing, it just seemed appropriate. What with all the time you've been spending with Robert playing doubles," she said with a grin.
He withdrew the black shirt from the bag. On the front was the outline of a tennis ball, with lines coming away from it to indicate motion. The 3 words that ran across the chest stood out in bright white screen print. He chuckled.
"That's a good one. I'm sure Robert will appreciate it." "Well, you're in luck. I've already washed it, so it's ready for your match tonight."
Richard hesitated for only a moment, then whipped off the plain grey t-shirt he had on, and put on the new one.
Linda smiled languidly, and ran her hands across his chest. "So handsome, Mr. Granger. You're welcome to court me any time." Despite his unease about the impending meeting with the Death Eaters, Richard's heart swelled with love for his wife. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her to his chest. Amidst all of the craziness, the magical surgeries and energy drinks, the prophecies and receptions and drinking straws, sometimes it was easy to forget why he was doing all of this. He would do anything he could to protect his family. He always had. Their lips met in a slow but intense kiss. She pulled away slightly. "Are you sure you don't have time for a quick match with me?" she asked playfully. He smiled ruefully. "Not even time for a game, I'm afraid. But we can volley when I get home later. That would be aces, love."
The meeting was about to start when Lucius apparated them back to the gates of Malfoy Manor. They hurried inside to the designated dining room.
"Ah, Cousin Richard, I am pleased that you could join us,"
Voldemort called to him, gesturing to a chair at his right for Richard. As Richard drew closer, the Dark Lord appeared to notice his shirt.
At times I feel that truer words were never spoken,"
he said, raising his straw to point at the lettering on Richard's shirt. Richard looked down.
"Love means nothing?"
Voldemort nodded.
"Yes, how often that is true."
Richard could think of no reply. It made sense, considering who he was talking to, but thought to himself, what an awful comment to make. Voldemort turned to face the rest of the group.
"Lucius informs me that young Draco and Miss Granger are close to having a way for a group of us to enter Hogwarts. Who among you will volunteer for this mission?"
Richard was quick to raise his hand, and noticed that Bellatrix Lestrange did the same. A small handful of others followed.
"Very well. Richard, you shall lead."
A yowl, like a cat whose tail had been trod upon, issued from across the room. Bellatrix looked as though Voldemort had slapped her across the face.
"Richard shall lead?"
she asked scornfully.
"Allow me to finish, Bellatrix," Voldemort admonished. "As I was saying, Richard shall lead during the fight that I anticipate against the Order of the Phoenix. However, as he did not attend Hogwarts, he does not know the castle very well. Therefore, Bellatrix, you shall take point in the efforts of getting to wherever Dumbledore is. Once you have found him, remember that the task to kill him falls to young Malfoy and young Granger."
Bellatrix grinded her teeth. The dentist within Richard wanted to tell her to stop. Finally, she appeared to back down and nod her acceptance. Richard cleared his throat.
"With all due respect, cousin."
All eyes turned to him, and Richard could feel the held breath of the collective group.
"Yes?"
Voldemort asked.
"I feel that Draco and Hermione have been developing a strategy to draw Dumbledore to a certain location, and have worked with school patrols to minimize interactions," Richard said. "And I believe Draco is capable of leading the fight against any resistance we encounter. He is a student, and he's expected to be there. I think if an adult leads the group, it will be immediately obvious that that's an attack."
"Perhaps you are right,"
Voldemort said uncertainly, tapping his straw against his lips.
"I believe I will be more useful as a drag man at the end of the patrol. That way, if we're attacked from the rear, we will be protected,"
Richard offered. This had been discussed and planned with order, so that no Death Eaters wandered away from the group and struck out on their own.
You must be ready to go as soon as Malfoy tells us that the cabinet is ready. Remember,
Voldemort said, turning a stern eye on Bellatrix, who sat up, straight to listen.
I have commanded Draco or Hermione to administer the Avada Curse. The children are to be given every chance to succeed. If either of them fails, it will reflect badly upon those around them and upon their families.
At this, Voldemort looked briefly, but sinisterly, at Lucius and Richard. Lucius dropped his eyes and swallowed hard, but Richard met the man's red gaze steadily. "Get through this," he told himself. "Just get through it. Right now, love means nothing. Love means nothing." The first week of June, 1997. By the beginning of June, Draco and Hermione were fairly certain that they had solved the mystery of the vanishing cabinet. However, with final examinations and the last Quidditch matches of the year, it had been difficult to find time to perform final tests. Not to mention, neither of them wished to do it. "We can't put it off forever, though. Father says the Dark Lord is getting anxious. It needs to be soon," Draco said, rubbing a figure 8 pattern on Hermione's shoulder.
They were taking a break to rest on an old blue velvet sofa, which had been covered with drawings of smutty runes. The room of requirement, though cavernous, was beautiful in its own way, a cathedral, a monument to things forgotten. She turned to face him. "I know we'll have to do it soon. There's only about 3 weeks left in the term. But I hate the idea of this whole thing. Harry is going to be angry at us for keeping this from him. Ron and Ginny, too." She sighed at the thought.
"Hermione, we can't worry about that. This is important. It has to be done this way. He has people watching. The order is certain. If Potter's grief and outrage seems staged, if the Dark Lord realizes—"
"I know," she interrupted, stealing a quick kiss from Draco. "But I also hate knowing that our time together working on this is coming to an end. It's been so much work, but sharing it with you has been wonderful."
"You realize that you won't be getting rid of me that easily?"
Draco drawled. "No, I hope not." She smiled, pulling herself closer to him to rest her head in the crook of his neck. "But summer is coming, and after all this time together, I hate the idea of being apart from you."
He groaned. "You know I hate that too, Witch."
He pushed her away slightly, reluctantly.
"I know it's a long time from now, but hopefully, one day soon, we can be together for always."
She closed her eyes and laid back on the sofa, resting her back against Draco whilst staring up at the ceiling. She blew out a long breath. "One day, perhaps. But I suppose, in the meantime, we can enjoy this time whilst it lasts." It was easy to think of the room of requirement as their own private oasis, he thought, a place for the two of them to get away from everything. In here, there were no final examinations, no anxious Harry Potter asking what they were planning. Here, they didn't have to worry about whether or not they would pass their apparition tests, or if their families were in danger because of the secrets they carried. Their only worry here was fixing a broken cabinet, something they had mostly accomplished. Still, the solitude drew them to the room often. The beauty of it was, they thought there was no one else to bother them here. But they were mistaken. From near the entrance of the room, a slight distance away, came the unmistakable clink of glass on glass, a frenzied voice muttering about allegations and secrets. Draco sprang up from the sofa and reached for his knapsack, withdrawing the hand of Glory. He fumbled in the pocket of his trousers and fished out a small drawstring bag. With nimble fingers, he withdrew a pinch of black powder and tossed it into the air.
"Draco!" whispered Hermione's voice urgently from the direction of the sofa. The entire room had been plunged into darkness. He gripped the hand of Glory, and she swam into focus dimly. "Stay right there. I'll take care of it," he said to her quietly. He crept slowly forwards towards the entrance, where the fumbling had grown louder. Professor Sybil Trelawney had forced her way into the room of hidden things, dragging a cloth sack behind her, bulging with clinking glass bottles. Despite the darkness and the professor's decided lack of obvious clairvoyant ability, she apparently could sense that someone was nearby. "Who's there? This room is off limits for students. This will mean detention." Without speaking, Draco rushed at her, bustling her and her bottles swiftly from the room. He closed the door behind her. "I need a room where I can hide things that no one can find, that no one but myself and Hermione Granger can get inside." He huffed out quickly, resetting the wards of the room to prevent more unexpected entries. He picked his way carefully back to Hermione, vanishing the instant darkness powder as he did so. He flopped back down on the sofa next to her. "Apparently, Professor Trelawney spends a lot of time playing drinking games by herself," Draco said with a chuckle. Hermione lay back, laughing. "That explains so much." In the 3rd week of June, Dumbledore asked everyone involved in the plot to meet one last time and go over the plan and their locations. "So, Hermione and I will meet Mr. Granger and his group at the Vanishing Cabinet," Draco was saying.
"Wait, Hermione will be with you?"
The idea of this made Richard nervous.
"I thought she could perhaps stay, I don't know, safe in her rooms."
"We have been over this," interjected Snape. "The Dark Lord has assigned this task to both of them. Both of them need to be present. He will ask for a full recount of the events from everyone there that night, you can be sure. If Miss Granger is missing, it will seem suspicious to him."
"But—"
Richard wasn't sure how to explain his worries to these people. They all seemed so confident, so assured. How could they be certain that nothing would go wrong? In the military world it was easy. If someone brandished a gun, they were an active threat. They could use it at any time, on anyone around them. You could shield yourself, or produce your own gun, but the threat was obvious. In the wizarding world, everyone was walking around with a gun. But the gun was also a method of healing, or a way of producing something vitally important. It could be used for good or evil, and it was given to 11-year-olds.
"Perhaps I can put your worries into words," Dumbledore said encouragingly. "You view wands as a threat. You worry that Draco's aim might be off, or that he will accidentally fire at Hermione instead, or that he will accidentally kill me."
Richard exhaled and closed his eyes. "Yes," he whispered.
"Dad,"
Hermione began, but Dumbledore held up a hand.
"It's entirely understandable. A weapon is a weapon, no matter how one thinks of it. However, Mr. Granger, let me offer you a bit of reassurance. A wand, as you know, is different than an ordinary weapon. It is unique in that it cannot go off accidentally. The wand carrier must truly intend to help, or to harm, in order to perform magic. The wand itself is merely a twig, a conduit through which the witch or wizard's intentions are channeled."
Dumbledore stood and walked to the perch upon which his beautiful red bird rested. I believe in my heart of hearts that Draco will have no intent to harm me or anyone else there that night on the astronomy tower. It is for that reason that I feel safe with him pointing a wand at me and uttering the curse. The words mean nothing. I could point my wand at any of you and say the words repeatedly, and not a hair would be out of place for any of you." Richard nodded his understanding slowly. "Yes, but Draco wouldn't be the only person up there with Hermione." "That is true," Dumbledore said. "And based upon the list of individuals you have said are coming, there is cause to be concerned. Bellatrix Lestrange has never been known for her restraint, and the Carrows are ignorant, depraved, and deviant. The rest of them are apathetic at best." Draco spoke up. "Mr. Granger, believe me when I say I will do everything I can to keep Hermione safe. I've been practicing shield charms, and I will do all I can to protect her." "I will also be there, Mr. Granger," said Snape. "I know we do not know each other well, and I must admit your sense of humour irks me greatly. However, I am duty-bound to protect the students of Hogwarts." Richard smiled and nodded his thanks. "I'm glad you will be in the mix, Professor Snape. Not sure how Dumbledore managed to draft you into service, but I appreciate it." Snape simply stared at him for a moment, then looked away, annoyed, whilst Remus and Sirius hid their laughter. The final preparations were discussed. Who would be where and when, and so on. Snape gave the bottle of necessary potion to Sirius, explaining in clipped tones how it would work. For better or worse, the 9 of them were nearly ready.
Thank you for listening to The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great78. If you enjoyed this and would like to listen to more, please subscribe to me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts at Silver and Copper, or search Great78 on Archive of Our Own.